Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. Test. 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 Okay, evening everybody. Hope that you're all well. Evening Anne. Let me just readjust that a bit. So I'm not kind of peering over the top of the bottom of the screen. Okay, so quite a familiar subject for most of us tonight, which is stress, chronic stress specifically. And interestingly, it's Stress Awareness Month, which is one of the reasons that I'm doing this. And the other reason I'm doing it is because the pandemic grinds on. And I know I keep coming back to this and I keep coming back to the basics. But under the circumstances, I think that it's appropriate to do so. And as you all know, I can never teach the same class twice the same way anyway. So tonight, what I'm going to do is clarify as much as I can about chronic stress. You can read about it, and it'll be explained in a number of different ways. Some of it is not really helpful. One perspective of stress is that it's something that our ancestors needed, and it's redundant. We don't really need it anymore. I must admit, I did ascribe to that at one point. But what I've done is I've learned since then that actually we all need stress because it actually saves our lives. And the way that happens is that if you've ever had to avoid getting run over, it was your stress system that kicked in, that got you physically out of the way. Evening Caroline, evening Gilbert. And it is a very dangerous place, modern urban environment. If we compare it to our ancestors, the chances are they'd be able to walk more than 10 foot from their cave without facing an existential threat. But because of the nature of traffic and so on in the modern world, that's a different matter. It's a very real thing that we need to have our wits about us to get through the day. Now, so the thing is if you take that event, so there you are, you're walking across the road, and a car comes out of nowhere driving, like Michael Schumacher, and you leap out of the way, you can feel your heart pounding, your blood pressure will have grown significantly, and you'll have all sorts of physiological stress responsive, one of which is the famous stress chemicals like cortisol. And then what will happen is after a little while you'll calm down. What the system is designed to do is to keep you on alert until the threat goes away. But a lot of the threats that we encounter nowadays, that we perceive to be threats, and that our system responds to as threats, are things like financial insecurity, careers, difficult neighbours, difficult boss, etc., etc., etc. And the consequence of that is that this hangs around, so the threat is maintained. And if that isn't enough, you just need to turn the news on, right? Because their purpose in life is to frighten you so that you keep coming back to consume more news to see if the horrible, terrible thing that's happening has been resolved. And clearly it hasn't, because there's another thing, and so on, and goes on and on and on, which is why it's called the news. It's all about new information. It's not about what's important. It's about what's new. And they've discovered that the human brain is a voracious appetite for anything that could potentially be a threat, and that gets attention. And so one of the other things that's happened is that the media cranks up the fear factor about just about everything, because they're all busy competing with each other for your attention, and that's what gets it. So we're in this environment of constant threat, or what our brain perceives as constant threat. Logic doesn't come into it. Very often the brain concludes that certain things are threats that aren't, and it also can conclude that things aren't threats that are. But the end result of the modern world is that the threat levels remains quite high, and the consequence of that is that our stress level remains quite high. And that has all sorts of really unhelpful secondary effects. It affects our sleep, it affects our digestion, and it affects our immunity. And the immune system is reliant on the same stress chemical, cortisol, that the body gets pumped full of. And so what happens is the immune system gets out of kilter, and then we're more likely to become unwell. And in fact, there are some illnesses, autoimmune illnesses, that it is standard procedure now for GPs to prescribe antidepressants for. And the reason that they do that is because they notice an improvement in the physical well-being of the patients. Because the stress level that the individual may not be aware of is actually cranked up their cortisol, and the cortisol is affecting the immune system. If it's the antidepressants work to counteract that in a whole bundle of ways, and so what happens is that I've heard this a number of times now. So that doesn't paint a particularly rosy picture, and the way that government deals with this is to have a set of well-being factors that they apply. Exercise being right at the top of the list because it doesn't cost them anything, and it's perceived to be a noble virtue to get up and pound the streets at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's a wonderful thing, and it's great. However, at some point, the adversity that's causing the stress is actually going to be something that has stopped you from being able to get up and do your run. They're also quite keen on things like meditation overall, because it's cheap. It's just as cheap as exercise. You know, the public does it, so that you're paying for your classes, you're paying for your courses. To be fair, the NHS is spending a reasonable amount of money on mindfulness, but only a tiny fraction of what it spends on drugs, for example. So how do we navigate this landscape of stress? Going back to, and speaking as somebody who became completely overwhelmed by stress at one point in my life, I wasn't aware, well, I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't aware that actually my stress levels had become so high. And the way that I perceived it, I didn't perceive it as a physical thing, although there were physical symptoms. You know, I don't know if you heard me speak about it, but I had a lump in my throat. So it was like, a grief lump. I was there all day. And I mentioned that, and I've heard a number of other people also say they have the same thing, or had the same thing. That sort, and other people experience, migraines get out of control. They get a tight chest. Breathing becomes an issue. Panic attacks can ensue. It isn't just about the body. It's the... Let me just move over to this little example here. it's the interaction of our physiology, our mind, and our emotions. So thoughts and emotions. So the thoughts are directing our attention, and so are the emotions. What they are is the organism, the collection of cells that make me up, or anybody that's experiencing stress. It's drawing our attention to attempt to resolve the fact that the system is out of balance. And there's the meditation practices work in two ways to resolve this. One is they can work for different people at a different level to resolve short-term stress. So if I'm feeling stressed now, I feel a little bit less stressed, literally. If that's a wonderful thing, but what we actually need to resolve is the interactions of these. At the center of all of this, of the stress, of the worry, the anxiety, the sense of having a really difficult experience with something, there's a desire for action, perhaps the inability to take the actions that we believe we need. All of this kind of stuff, it all adds up together. It becomes a jumbled mess, and untangling that's what meditation does over a period of time. So one of the first things that it does, and this is what we'll do, is we'll focus on this today, is that in the mind of somebody who's stressed or depressed, or in the state of mind, so we're not just talking about the thoughts and emotions, we're talking about the whole thing, the picture of the experience of the reality that they're experiencing. Thoughts and emotions are entangled like this, as is the problem itself. The mind is, as a perceptual instrument, perceives our experience in a lot of ways that don't appear to be obvious, but actually are really quite significant. And the connection of the event, the problem, the feelings, the emotions, the thoughts, the beliefs about how we're perceived by others, the beliefs about how we perceive other people, observe us deal with it, the whole thing becomes tightly enmeshed. The solution to that Gordian knot isn't some clever combination of steps to resolve it. It's a process of observation. And the first observation is the realization that thoughts and emotions are separate. So I can say that, and you can say, well, of course they are, but there's every chance that internally you have a deep belief that it's all one thing. So that observation of thoughts and emotions at a very gentle level is what we're going to do today. So if you just want to get yourselves comfortable, and I'll sound the bell, so that you can notice the sound of the bell moving through time. So So it's going to make a little transition into the practice of observing our inner experience. Move from navigating our world in the way that we've learned to do it to noticing the inner experience. And so checking in with our physiology is a really good first step, where experiencing whatever tension there is, we're experiencing whatever thoughts there are, we're experiencing however cool or warm we are, however tired or alert we are. However relaxed or tense we are. And the anchor into this is the breath, and a gentle scan of the body, noticing whatever tightness there is. And focusing on the out breath. So allow your awareness to drift from wherever you notice tension in your body, moving from one place to the other. Could be the shoulders, could be the back and sides of the neck. Could be the face, the hands, the belly, the chest. And as we pass our awareness over the body, we're noticing the out breath. And so we're still connected to the breath. And we're able to notice the movement of the breath rising and falling in the belly. Gentle cycle of movement. Belly rising, belly falling. And noticing the belly, what it's done is it's brought our awareness inward. So we're now connected to our physiology. Remembering that thoughts are messages from the mind. The mind wants us to address something. If it's persistent, repetitive, compelling, it's because the organism that is us, there's a belief somewhere that focus will resolve whatever imbalance there is. So we need to acknowledge that. And the way that we acknowledge it is by noting thoughts. And the softest, gentlest way to note thought is to notice it on the out breath on two separate out breaths, repeating in the mind, thinking, thinking. So we're connected to the purity of the breath. The crystal clear connection to this deep inner cycle of life that operates within us. And we're calmly and kindly acknowledging the mind. Thought arises, next two out breaths, say in the mind, thinking, thinking. And throughout that entire process, staying focused on the breath. So I'll just practice that for the next couple of minutes. So by witnessing the breath, we're observing the neutrality of the present moment. The present moment's largely neutral. We can't generally distinguish between good and bad breaths. It's a point of focus, a neutral point of focus. And now bringing our awareness to the space between the eyes, also known as the third eye, just an ancient name for it. And all we're doing is leaving our attention there. Still able to notice the breath rising and falling. And we can also notice whatever sound there is. The more deeply we focus on the space between the eyes, the more comfortable it is letting these two separate experiences, the internal experience of the breath and the external experience of whatever sound there is. By noticing the space between the eyes, we can witness these two things happening. Both of these experiences, the breath and sound, allow us to notice the passage of time. And notice how neutral the experience of focusing on the third eye is. So we can just leave our attention there. And again, if thoughts arise, repeat in the mind, thinking, thinking. If it's a physical sensation that comes to our awareness, could be an emotion, could be comfort or discomfort or tiredness or whatever it happens to be. What we do is acknowledge that, irrespective of the sensation. This isn't just reserved for emotions, it's for any feeling. We say in our mind, feeling, feeling. Throughout it all, staying focused on the third eye. If you want, you can repeat those words on the out breath. Thinking, thinking. If a thought arises, or feeling, feeling, on separate out breaths. If any physical sensation intervenes, emotion or otherwise. So I'll leave you with this for a few minutes. And now maintaining a background awareness of the third eye and the breath. Just allow your mind to be free. Notice gently other sensations and sounds and other experiences coming into your awareness. And if the mind gets drawn away, you bring your attention to the third eye. And then gently open up again. Allowing the mind to be free. And then if the attention's drawn into anything, back to the third eye and repeat. So it's like following the breath, except noticing that space between the eyes. In your very own time, maintaining that state of mind, that meditating on the neutral present moment brings. So, let's see if I can. There you go. Right. So, what we were doing then was focusing on a very neutral experience. The third eye can be the breath, can be both. And from that, when the mind drifted away, we returned our attention and we were either, I don't think that's helpful, we were either aware of the thoughts by saying in the mind thinking, or if it was a sensation in the body, whether it's an emotion or not, whether it's a physical sensation, feeling. And this is part of the process of separating these. The process of separating those is part of the process of separating thoughts and emotions and sensations and desires and actions and will and others and problems and so on and so forth. And that begins to unravel the Gordian knot, that kind of consequence of which is the sense that there's an impending threat continually. And of course the mind will tell you, yeah, there is. So you go, yeah, I need to worry and so on and so forth. But you notice when you're in a neutral experience like that, your karma, actually there's no less chance that the issue is going to be resolved, whatever it is. Okay, so there's a little step towards the resolution of chronic stress. Oh, it's a little step, it's a big step. The separating of thoughts and emotions, and that's a very gentle way to do it. Okay, so that's it for today. Let's have a look. What are we doing on... So Saturday is emotional resilience for the Loving Awareness group, and then we're back again next week for the second. So I've split it up this month. We've got the cycle of stress, anxiety and worry. The first two training sessions in this group are breaking the cycle of stress. The following Saturday is a public session as well. I'll be focusing on pandemic burnout. Okay, so glad you enjoyed that, Caroline. It's a very gentle, very light touch, neutral, present moment experience. And yeah, it can actually, it's if you can, if you're fortunate, if one of these people who is fortunate enough to be able to bring their attention to the third eye, you can draw your awareness away from all sorts of really unhelpful stuff that otherwise would grab your attention and not let go of it. Okay, good night, everybody. Have a great evening. Have a great weekend, unless I speak to you on Saturday or Sunday. Take care. Thank you.